The topic that I want to introduce to you today is in our textbooks, it's chapter 14. It is foreign exchange. And I want to go straight to the theme of this lesson, and I want to introduce you to a few definitions first. Later on, we will look at a form of explanations on calculations, and then if there's time left, we will also move over into time zone calculations, which I know a lot of you struggle with if you haven't studied your steps. So today we're going to look at a lot of steps that you have to follow to make sure you get to that right answer. So let's kick it off, our first tourism lesson, and let's go to foreign exchange and exchange rates. If we can go here, what is the gross domestic product? So that's the first theme I want to kick off with. GDP, as we all know it, the GDP stands for the gross domestic product, and a lot of us don't really understand what this means and why it's relevant to tourism. Now let me explain to you. Our economy is based on a few industries that adds money and value to the country. Now the tourism industry is the third largest generator of income in South Africa. And as you can understand, the crisis we are in now with the whole coronavirus situation has put a lot of strain on the tourism industry because no one can travel. We can't go overseas. Foreigners can't come into our country to experience our lovely country, attractions and icons. So it's very difficult to generate income at this stage. And this has a direct effect on our economy. And we can see that when we look at our GDP. So the GDP, the gross domestic product, is the monetary value of all goods and services that are produced in a country in 1 year. So the emphasis here is that it's everything that you sell in the tourism industry combined. And here we only look at the formal sector. In other words, every tourism-related company that's registered, where they get their income, the total income for the tourism industry all combined in a year represents the GDP contribution of tourism to our whole economy. You'll see later in the show why it's so important to know what the GDP is. So per definition, and you have to know this definition for your coming exams, the GDP stands for gross domestic product, and it is the sum total of everything produced in the country in the tourism industry in 1 year. You will see that there's even an economic and mathematical calculation how the GDP is calculated. Now I want to tell you for now, you can read through it and understand what is combined to make up the GDP, but it is not necessarily at this point so important. We want to get to the better stuff a bit later. All right guys, so moving on, we're going to see how the GDP benefits South Africa. All right, so the GDP, as I've said before, provides info on how our economy is doing. In other words, if the economy is in a good state, healthy, you'll see that there's a lot of jobs, people have a lot of money to spend on necessities and also on things they don't normally had before. So in other words, a good GDP means that we are actually doing well in our country. If all the industries have a positive growth in GDP, it means there's a positive growth in our economy. All right, so each and every year, GDPs are compared with one another to determine growth. And if you have economics, you'll see it's actually every term. All right, point number 3. A growing economy shows that jobs are being created. People can afford a lot more. The GDP does not include the informal sector. Now, informal sector are those sectors where people basically sell and buy and cash is exchanged, but there's no paper trail. It's your people that sell souvenirs on the street. They don't have receipt books or invoices or so. So it's very difficult to determine the value of those sales and contribute it to the GDP. So the GDP only explains the buying or selling of products in our country that is recorded or formal. All right, the next definition I want us to focus on, that is actually an everyday thing in the tourism industry, is the multiplier effect. Now you might think, multiplier, are we doing maths here right now or what? No, the multiplier effect refers to the spending of foreign people, foreign tourists in our country. Remember, their money is a lot stronger than our money. If you compare the rand to the dollar, for example, you'll see at this moment our rand is very weak, and we know why. But foreign money that comes into the country goes a long way if it rolls through the informal industries, and I'll get to that now. Let's quickly look at the textbook definition of the multiplier effect. So the multiplier effect is a process by which foreign exchange, now if we say foreign exchange, we're referring to the forex, and you will hear that word a lot during today's lesson. So it is when a foreign currency is brought into South Africa by tourists, and then there's a flow of this currency through the economy. All right, so I'm going to make use of a quick example to make this textbook definition just more practical. All right, so there's a coffee shop at the waterfront in Cape Town. A tourist comes into South Africa, excited to visit South Africa and visit Cape Town and experience all our attractions, go up Table Mountain and so on. But at the end of the day, this tourist ends up at the waterfront. So this tourist goes to the coffee shop, have a nice coffee. The tourist pays for the coffee. It's not a problem to tip because this tourist is, let's say, from America. They pay with dollars, not at the coffee shop, but obviously they've exchanged their dollars to rands. You'll see why I say that. We'll get to that definition and calculations later. But they pay with rands, so to pay in rand after you've exchanged your dollars is actually quite cheap for you. So the tip might be enormous. All right, so this person pays for the coffee, pays for accommodation, pays for transport in and around Cape Town, and after a week or two, go back home. What happens to the money that was spent? That is where the multiplier effect comes in. The money that was spent at all these attractions, but specifically the coffee shop, for example, make the owner of this coffee shop being able to pay salaries, to buy new stock, and eventually those salaries end up in the waiter or waitress pocket. Now this waiter or waitress goes back home. They've earned more money than they've earned the month before because the tourists came into South Africa, and now this person can pay for necessities at home. Maybe if there's extra money, those necessities can become privileges. In other words, you can pay for things you never had before. You can go to the movies. You can give your kids extra spending money. The bottom line is the money that was initially spent by a tourist at an attraction or that was spent at a coffee shop, a restaurant, ends up in the pockets of the South Africans. And those South Africans go and spend that money again in the local industries in their surrounding areas. So this money spreads through the industries in the local economy. In this case, the local economy of the Cape Town region and area. Okay, so now let's have a look. How do we link the multiplier effect to the GDP? Remember we spoke about the GDP just a few minutes ago. Let's have a look. The multiplier effect, it links the GDP where tourists are coming into the country. They buy our products and services. Remember, in the tourism industry, we most likely and normally have a lot of services rather than products. You see, tourism, in all essence, is actually an export product. We export tourism as an experience. Therefore, when people come into South Africa and spend their foreign currencies here after converting it to rand, we get the benefit thereof. In other words, we've exported the service. All right, so the GDP and the multiplier effect are linked when we buy products and services as a foreigner coming into South Africa, and the money that paid for that services gets spread, and that is the most important part, through the economy. The flow of money increases the value of the consumer or the private spending. That is where I refer to this person who's the waiter at the coffee shop having extra money now to actually be able to give to their kids, to pay for additional services and products, go shopping, and just have a wealthier life. All right, so that's the link between the GDP and the multiplier effect. Okay, so now the big question, and I think you guys who have actually been watching the news, at the end of the news you will normally see rates that they give. They say, what is the rand in comparison to the US dollar, to the pound, to the euro? Now, we normally talk about our rand is strong, or our rand is very weak. I think recently in the past few years, it's very safe to say, and I won't be making a mistake if I say we currently have a very weak rand comparing it to other foreign major currencies, or as we call it, forex. So the difference between a strong rand and a weak rand. Let's have a look. A strong rand implies that when we want to buy another currency, we will pay little for that currency. In other words, let's say we were privileged enough to travel, and all travel is banned at this moment, unfortunately, for all the tourism industries out there. But let's say everything was as it was about a year ago, or as we hope it will be in the future again. If you travel to America, for example, and our rand is strong, then it means that our rand is very close to the value of the American dollar. So it doesn't make sense for us to go to, let's say, America on holiday where our currency is almost as strong as their currency. It won't be cheap. All right, so this is an advantage for South African tourists to go overseas on holiday. Our rand is strong. We've got a lot of money. When we go to another country, we don't have to exchange, the ratio between our currency and their currency is small, so the gap makes it possible for us to have cheaper holidays overseas. However, as I said, tourism is an export product. In other words, we want people to come to South Africa. We want to make money. And if our rand is strong, it means that people will not consider us if in comparison to another country in Africa, for example, with similar products and services, but whose currency is a lot weaker. Remember, it's about the buying power of your currency in comparison to another currency. Now let's go look at the opposite, a weak rand. If our rand is weak, which it is at this stage, we buy another currency with a weak rand, we will have to pay more for less units. So with a weak rand, we pay more for less units of the other currency. That means it is too expensive to travel overseas. You can't afford to go overseas because our currency is very weak. For every $1 example you're going to have to spend that side in America, you're going to have to pay around about 18, 19 rand. All right, so it's very expensive. If you convert all your currencies, flight tickets, accommodation, transport, attractions, everything you need to consider, as you would know by now when you have done your tour budget, it's just too expensive for the average South African to travel abroad with a weak currency. Okay, so the two concepts, strong currency. A strong currency is actually good for us if we want to go overseas because it's affordable for us. A weak rand or a weak currency is actually beneficial for our tourism industry because people will stay in South Africa and foreigners will visit us because it's cheap for them to experience our attractions, but we won't go overseas. It's too expensive for us. So that's the main and big difference. All right. Next, I want to emphasize what causes a strong or a weak currency. All right, first of all, the main cause for a currency to become strong, and that is, guys, what we are hoping for in the next few years to come. We really need it. A steady, very important, steady and positive GDP growth rate. Now, remember I told you a few slides back that the GDP tells us the worth of our economy. Now, the GDP contribution of the tourism industry at this stage is about zero. No one's paying any accommodation, no one's traveling, no one's visiting attractions. So the contribution of the tourism industry to the GDP of South Africa at this stage is very low. So basically you can make the assumption that it's not going to contribute to making our rand stronger. In fact, the opposite. The second one there, a low rate of inflation. Now, inflation is normally when you use a product, for example, let's say bread. What did I pay for a loaf of bread 2 years ago, and what am I paying for a loaf of bread today? That growth in the price that you need to pay as a consumer is the inflation. that has grown. So if the inflation rate at which prices increase every year is very low, it gives us a strong currency or a strong rand. The third one, stable politics. Now, politics is a very diverse topic, especially in a country like South Africa. All you need to know is if there are not a lot of ups and downs and politics are stable, it gives investors and people overseas confidence in South Africa. They feel safe to come to South Africa. They know exactly what to expect. In other words, that will also make our industries grow, our GDPs will grow, and it will lead to a stronger rand. Number 4, a strong demand for our currency. Now, we all know if you are overseas, you live in Britain or you live in America, you work with the pound or the dollar, it's nice to have those currencies at hand because it's got a lot of value worldwide. In South Africa, when our currency, our rand is weak, it's pretty safe to say that no one wants our rands. They would rather want to sell foreign currency to us and buy foreign currency from us, but our rand is not at this stage very strong, therefore the demand for the rand will not be that high. All right, guys. Now, let's have a look at the main causes of a currency becoming weak. You'll see this is the exact opposite of what we've just discussed. So number 1, there will be a negative GDP growth rate. So if you have listened to all the announcements over the TV and the news and the experts and the economists over the past few weeks during lockdown, you would have realized that a lot of them are saying that our GDP growth rate that was expected at a certain percentage will not be reached anymore. In other words, we are now looking at a negative growth rate. We're basically going back. All right, so a negative or a weak GDP growth rate, no contribution to GDP, especially from tourism side. You can imagine our rand's value will go down and down up to a point where, well, I'll leave it for your imagination. All right, number 2, a high rate of inflation. Inflation, as I said previously, is the amount of which products grow in price, that you have to pay more for the same product every year. At this stage, you know how much prices have increased over the past few years, so that means we currently have higher inflation rates than what we want. That means it contributes to our rand becoming weak. Third one, political instability. Now, politics does not always refer to our government necessarily. Politics is about the stability in a country. It's about stability amongst residents of a country. It's between residents and the public sector, the private sector. So there's a lot of contributing factors when it comes to political stability or instability. If you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, you don't know if people's going to strike, if people's going to demand certain things, you don't know what's going to happen, it creates uncertainty, and therefore foreigners will assume that our country is politically unstable, and therefore they will rather try to avoid us, which means they don't come here, they don't spend their money here, therefore we don't get contribution to the GDP, and there's a link to a weak rand. Number 4, weak demand for our currency. Again, if there's a weak demand for our currency, people don't want our rands, they can't do anything with our rands overseas or so, they can't invest it, it's not really worth anything to them. They will obviously not demand our currency, and therefore it links to our rand staying weak. Number 5, global economic challenges that affects the currency negatively. It can be recessions in other countries. Doesn't always mean that if it's not going well in South Africa, it's the only factor that's going to contribute to our rand weakening. There can be something happening in Europe or in America that indirectly affects South Africa when it comes to the buying and selling, importing and exporting of products. So globally, if something economical major happens, like a world recession or a recession in a country, that's a key point where you need to understand our currency will be affected. The last one there, and this links directly to what we're busy experiencing, is major natural disasters. In the textbook, they refer to floods, droughts, and earthquakes. Currently, we can use the whole coronavirus spread in the world as the best example here. It has brought economies to a standstill. people are losing jobs, people are losing money, people are losing income. Of course, it's having a huge negative effect on the worth of our rand or our currency. So guys, that is the difference between a strong and a weak currency and effects that contributes to a strong and a weak currency. All right, let's quickly have a look at our main currencies that you might deal with in exam papers. Of course, every country have a currency code, a name for their currency, but the ones that are listed here are basically the ones that you will see most commonly in your exam papers and that you will have to use in calculations. So we work with the US dollar, we work with the British pound, and it's very important that you study these symbols. I'm referring to those symbols there, because sometimes they will not write out the word, they will literally give you a symbol, and you need to know, are you working with pounds, euros? There you can see the Japanese yen, and obviously the Swiss franc as well. So those are the major currencies that you will use in exchange rates. So guys, now I want to move over to the second part of this chapter or theme of foreign exchange, and that is where you actually have to learn how to convert currencies. Okay, you want to go overseas, you earn money in South Africa, in other words, you get paid in rands, but when you go to America, and I'm using America not for any specific reason, it's just by default. If you go to America, you know you're going to have to pay in dollars. So you can't take out your wallet, take out your 100 Rand note in America and pay for a meter taxi. You're going to have to pay with the American dollar. So before going to America or overseas, you need to convert your currency to another currency. All right, so let's have a look at how this works. Converting currencies. You need to understand when you convert currencies that one of the currencies will be the forex. Now, forex will always be the stronger currency of the two. That is something you need to remember. The weaker currency will obviously be the other currency you're working with. So, we in South Africa, we work with rands. So, we're normally going to convert rands to forex or forex to rands. So, rand to forex. In this, if you convert your rand to forex, there's actually a situation that learners sit with a lot in exams. You've studied, you work so hard, you work through your calculations, you are so confident, and then you get that question in the exam where they just blow you away and you suddenly forget, should I multiply, should I divide? And that makes a huge difference when it comes to converting currencies. So today I want to teach you a little trick. And it works 99% of the time, for me 100% of the time if you truly understand it. So let's try. Let's see if I can transfer my knowledge to you. All right. So if you convert rand to forex, I want you to actually have a look. If you convert rand to forex, you need to write it out for yourself like that. Rand to forex. Now, look at the last letter of the first word. You see a D. Now, we can say D for divide. So the moment you convert rand to forex, and the forex is the stronger currency, you can divide with whatever the exchange rate is that they have given. All right. Let's use an example. Convert 10,000 Rand to euro up to 2 decimal places. Now, this is very important because rounding off is part of your calculation that will earn you your full marks if your answer is correct. All right, so convert 10,000 Rand to euro up to 2 decimal places with an exchange rate of 1 euro equals 10 Rand 6 cents. I wish it was like that still. This is exchange rates from about 7 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so you're going to convert rand to forex, and that's why I say you must write it out. So you're going to divide. You see, that's where we put the division in. What do we divide with? We have 10,000 Rand, so you can put side by side or apples with apples, and so we put rand with rand. You have 10,000, you want to convert it. All right, so at the end of the day, you want to use that exchange rate that's over there. And let's see if we can get to the correct answer then of 999.04 euros. So you have divided because you converted rand to forex. All right, now guys, let's look at the opposite. So now you want to convert your forex to rand. Let's say you went overseas, you didn't spend all the money that you've converted, and now you want to go back to the bank, you want to convert those dollars back to rand so that you can use your rands here in South Africa again. What will the calculation be? Okay, again, we write it out, and I'm going to use what we have in front of us here. It's the forex. We want to convert it to rand. To do that conversion, the last letter of the first word is the X. That's if you write it out, forex to rand. That's the only time when this tip works. All right, so the stronger currency to the weaker currency means you're going to multiply. All right, now guys, very important, and it is common knowledge, but if you didn't know about this, here's the tip. Why do banks buy and sell money? Remember, banks are businesses. They want to make money, profit, commission, whatever the synonym or the words are, that's what they want to do. So when banks trade, they are actually buying and selling the forex. And this is the key. This is very important. Banks do not want to trade with this weaker, smaller currencies. They'll take it from you and they'll put it in their systems and so, but they trade with forex. They buy and they sell the forex, the stronger currency of the two. And the difference between the rates that they offer when they buy and the rates that they offer when they sell will be their commission or their profit. Okay, let's look at another example. Convert 725 US dollars to rand up to 2 decimal places. Again, very important. If you get an answer on your calculator and that answer after the decimal is very long, you have to use your mathematical way to round it off to the nearest 2 decimals. Okay, so we have 725 US dollars. Let's say you came back from holiday overseas, you want to convert it back to rand. So what you're going to do now is first, if you're using my tip, you're going to write out the words. I want to convert my forex to rand. You write that sentence out. Okay, the last letter of the first word, forex to rand, is multiply. So already you know you're going to multiply. With what are you going to multiply? You're going to multiply with the exchange rate that was given. In this example, the exchange rate that was given is 8.19. So you add it in. The dollars that you wanted to exchange is 725. You do your calculation, you get your answer in rand. Remember, we said we want to convert it to rand. So your answer have to be in rand, and please remember to use the symbol of the currency in your final answer to not lose marks on that. All right, guys? So remember, exchange rates changes every day. In fact, if you're doing stock exchange and if you go deep into making money with exchange rates, it changes by the second. All right, so money fluctuates. That's the word that we're looking for. All right, so it will be wise to make a holiday, all your bookings for your holiday well in advance, because sometimes exchange rates can be in your favor and other times exchange rates might go up and your holiday suddenly has become a lot more expensive. All right, guys, we're going to take a short break just to have all that information sink in. When we come back, we're going to look at the bank buying rate and the bank selling rate and the calculations.